I awoke to the sound of dripping water. It was coming from somewhere in the kitchen, the open door just a few feet away. The smell hit me, just as pungent as it was when I went to sleep. My eyes started to water at the pure concentration of the odor, and the nausea set in. How long had it been since I arrived here? A week? A month? It sure felt like forever, but time was useless for me, since I knew however long it had been wouldn't affect how long it would be until I could leave. I heard the muffled humming, coming from a distance. It was him. He was on his way back. As he got closer, I heard the scrape of the rifle's rusty old barrel against the dirt. He was humming the song he always did when he caught some fresh game, and I could hear the pleasure in his deep grumble of a hum. His boots were hitting the ground with a satisfying thump, and he sounded in no way of a hurry. The steps got closer, and I heard him walk up the creaky wooden porch towards the old door. The door opened slowly, but with purpose. The man, who was built big and stocky, with large hands and feet and more hair on his chest than a werewolf, walked slowly towards the kitchen, still humming his tune. In his hand I could see a dead rabbit, its lifeless body dangling like a deflated balloon after a birthday party. He walked through the doorway, and I heard a loud plunk as he set the rabbit down on a wooden board somewhere. I had just started to realize how hungry I was. I couldn't remember the last time eating. When the man came back out, I let out a faint whisper. "Please, please, please give me something to eat." The man looked at me and gave me a creepy smile. A small chuckle came out, and then silence. "But you haven't even started performing for me today." I knew this meant that I wasn't getting fed for a while. The blisters on me hands and feet were killing me, and looked infected. If only the chain wasn't so strong, I could probably break them and make an escape. The man went back into the kitchen, and I heard him open and close the refrigerator. He walked out holding a cold beer, and slowly made his way towards the couch in the room across from me. He sat on his couch, let out a great big sigh, and turned on the television. I was sitting there alone in the dark for what seemed like hours, hunger driving me insane. I tried again and again to slip my feet out of the chains, but was to no prevail. They were too tight around my bony ankles. I fell back to sleep, wishing it could all be over. After a few minutes, I hear him stomping up a staircase, and possible dragging something behind him. He shuts a door, and I heard the familiar sound of something locking. He makes his way over to me, with a crazed look on his face. He is covered in blood from head to toe, and is holding what seems to be some sort of kitchen knife. He walks back into the kitchen, and drops his weapon into the sink. The man comes back out, still blood dripping from his beard, and walks over to me, holding a whip. He leans over, and I can smell the alcohol on his breath. "You want to be fed?" I give a small nod, and he unravels his whip. "Well, you are going to have to work for it." The way he said this deeply unsettled me, and I could tell that whatever was coming, it was not going to be fun. "Dance for me," he said, but all I could do was show confusion in my expression, as I had no idea what he mean. "Dance for me now." He this at the top of his lungs. I stood up and started moving my body, but I wouldn't call it dancing. The man took the whip in one hand, leaned back, and looked like he was ready to strike. With one quick movement, he took a hard whip at my feet, hitting the top of my right foot. I fell to the ground and started sobbing. He commanded that I get up and continue, and I tried my best to fulfill his orders. He again started whipping my feet until I started dancing as fast as I could. After about 5 minutes of this, I collapsed from exhaustion. The man gave one final chuckle and walked into the kitchen again, with a wide smile on his face. He grabbed the dead rabbit and brought it back. He put his large hands around the rabbit, one on its head, and one right below the neck. He pulled, until an awful sound of bones breaking and flesh ripping pierced the air around me. The head of the rabbit, now free from the body, was gripped in the man's right hand, like he was palming a basketball. He dropped the rabbit's head on the ground in front of me, and said, "Eat up." He laughed his cackling laugh and walked back into the room with the television. At this point, was frozen in fear. The hunger was so overwhelming, but the sight of the decapitated rabbit almost made me lose my appetite. Almost. What I did next was unspeakable, and the sheer thought of it makes me cringe. When I was finished, I laid on the floor in a ball and cried myself to sleep. I still heard the man chuckling throughout the night and eating what smelled to be rotten meat. I awoke to the sound of dripping water. It was coming from somewhere in the kitchen, the open door just a few feet away. The smell hit me, just as pungent as it was when I went to sleep. My eyes started to water at the pure concentration of the odor, and the nausea set in. How long had it been since I arrived here? A week? A month? It sure felt like forever, but time was useless for me, since I knew however long it had been wouldn't affect how long it would be until I could leave. Mike yawned. He wasn't used to the late nights yet. It was only his second night shift, as far as I'm aware, and by the time he had crossed the room to grab his 6th or 7th drink of coffee from the machine just outside the office door, I was started to get irritated by him. He was a lot younger than me, about 20 years old, and the age gap annoyed me since he acted like a child most of the time. My usual coworker for the night shift was on a vacation with our boss, since the two knew each other from college and had remained friends, so Mike was moved from the day shift to join me in the night shift. Working the night shift as a security guard was easy. Not at first, since, well, night shift. Kind of hard for the human brain to function 100% efficiently with the lack of sleep and dark shadows involved. I had always worked nights. After I had my first child and my wife went back to work, we both knew we couldn't afford a babysitter or childcare, so I stayed at home during the day and worked at night while my wife worked during the day. I had never done the day shift, but I assume it's probably more eventful than night shifts, watching people trip over and quickly look around to see if anyone had seen them, forgetting about the cameras, or hearing employees gossip in the kitchen over the boss daughter's millionaire boyfriend, or something like that. I wouldn't know. I'm at home during the day. Mike returned to sit in his computer chair, spinning around like a child in an ICT class in high school before tucking himself in. Caffeine. He placed his almost tsunami'd coffee cup on the desk by his keyboard and stared at the monitor showing the footage of the entrance. "Hey, Lucy." I closed my eyes in annoyance. "That's not my name." "Yeah, I know," he joked. "I was just wondering, what kind of things happen at night?" I opened my eyes, feeling the urge to smirk, but didn't. "Well, I could ask the same about the day shift." Mike shrugged and slouched in his seat. "It's less boring than this." I chuckled, pressing the right button on my keyboard to change the security footage from the hallway outside the bathrooms to the kitchen. A few things have happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Mike sit up slightly in his seat. "Yeah, like what? A ghost or something?" Got him. This kid was a nuisance. I had to admit, I was bored as well. There wasn't any harm in scaring him a little. Or something. Like what? I picked up my own cup of tea and brought it to my lips, smirking behind the mug. "Well, I took a sip. There's been a few times that some weird things have happened," I lied. "Like what?" Mike was upright in his seat now, having lost interest in actually doing his job. I kept my eyes on the screens while I tormented him. "Well, this one time I just switched to the feed of the west hallway of floor 4 and I saw a shadow leaving the frame. No one was supposed to be in the building that night, since it was Sunday, and the cleaners don't work on a Sunday, so I checked the other cameras around that area to see if I could find who it was." "Did you find who it was?" Mike asked. I crossed my legs and leant back. "No." "That what caused it?" I shrugged. "Probably just cars outside, or something." Of course the story wasn't true, but Mike seemed to believe it. "What else happened?" "I saw a cupboard door in the kitchen open." "Really?" "Yeah. And I turned to smile at Mike. One of the screws on the hinge had come loose and dropped out. Mike was silent for a moment. So it wasn't a ghost? I gave a quick bark of laughter and turned back to watch the camera feed, shifting to the next camera. Nah. I did say or something, didn't I? I raised an eyebrow. You seem awfully interested in the supernatural. Well, yeah, he sheeply said, leaning back some more. I've used a few Ouija boards a few times, but I've never gotten a reply. Why do you want to contact the dead? I asked. He shrugged. It just sounds interesting. He smiled. Do you think I should bring in a board tomorrow and we try it here during the night? I chucked and shook my head. This place isn't haunted, Mike. Mike was quiet for a moment. I could hear him shifting his mug around his desk, trying to fill the silence with something. In the end he sighed and said, "But it is haunted." I chuckled. Why, what have people been saying to you? I remember the story my usual co-worker had told me. Are you talking about that little girl who hung herself in the bathroom with her tie? Dude, my primary school was haunted by a girl who hung herself in the bathroom with a tie. My voice became sarcastic. Oh wow, what a coincidence, so did my high school. I led it back, smirking. And so did my college. So did my uni. I sighed. Every building in this goddamn country is haunted by that girl. I wasn't talking about that. Mike shifted in his seat. I saw something. In the day shift? Ghosts only come out at night, Mike. Mike shook his head violently. No, I didn't see a ghost. I looked at him from the corner of my eye. What was it then? A demon? A vampire? I heard him huff in frustration. Or was it a fairy? Oh, shut up, Lucy. That's not my name, I reminded him, flatly. I saw a guy drop dead in the IT suit. I stopped for a moment to think. A death in the IT suit? I hadn't heard of this. Maybe it hadn't caught the media, or our boss kept it under tight wrap. What do you mean, he dropped dead? Mike stared at me in disbelief. You seriously don't know about him? It was first thing in the morning. I just sat down in here to start my shift and I saw him collapse. He died in hospital later. For some strange reason, the tables felt like they had turned. Was this guy tricking me? Was this guy trying to spook me out? What was his name? Mike looked up and thought. Dan Brown, or something like that. He was lying. I chuckled. It was obvious he was lying. It didn't matter anyway. I had the upper hand. Yes, it was true that neither of us had any real experience with the other's job, but the night shift was obviously a more scary setting for a spooky story. I had been there longer, anyway. He was 20. He couldn't have been here long. When did this happen? I asked. He thought again. About a year ago, or so. Everybody knows about it. Seriously, do you not chat to anyone? I shrugged. Nah, not really. Must have missed that convo. Seriously? For like a month afterwards, everyone avoided the IT suit as much as possible. They said the dude was poisoned, but they thought it was suicide since he had just declared bankruptcy since his wife had claimed all his money in the divorce. You can't claim all of someone's money in a divorce, I stated. Knock it off, Mike. Haven't you got work to do? Mike pouted, but reluctantly turned back to look at his monitor. He was younger than me at 20 years old and less experienced at the night shift, so I had control over him. Dan Brown wasn't real. Mike flicked his camera feed to the IT suit. See? See what? I asked, looking over. That's where he died. I sighed. Knock it off. He pointed to his screen. And there's the doorway to the kitchen just behind. He pointed to another door. And there's the west corridor. It's on the 4th floor. They're all by where you said you saw things. I placed my hands to my face. Dude, I was lying. I was trying to spook you out. It's your second night here, and I wanted to give you the chills, or something." He looked at me with a confused face. "So, you didn't see a shadow or the cupboards move?" I huffed. "And you never saw someone die?" There was silence for a brief moment. Mike turned away from me and took a gulp of his cooling coffee, flicking through some feed. This was frustrating. I wasn't sure whether I liked Mike or not. He annoyed me, yet toying with him was fun, yet he pissed me off. "I did actually see someone die," he commented. I closed my eyes in annoyance, but didn't say anything. He was just trying to have the last word. "I saw a man get hit by a car near where I used to live." Okay, so it wasn't relevant to our jobs. What happened? His 7-year-old kid fell off his bike while trying to ride it for the first time and got caught under it. The dad saw the car speeding around the corner and jumped out to wave the car down, but the car hit him. It stopped before it went near the kid, but the dad died a few hours later in hospital due to internal bleeding. I pursed my lips. "So you didn't see someone die? You just saw the accident that led to his death." He shrugged. "Yeah, I guess you're right. It just creeped me out, though." He took another sip of his drink. "The kid didn't have a mother. She died when he was born. No siblings either." I sighed in pity. I flicked through a few cameras. "What happened to the kid?" "Went to a orphanage. Got a job." Something flickered on my screen as I clicked on the camera feed in the west hallway on the 4th floor. A shadow. Just a car. Got a job? How long ago was the accident? About 13 years ago. Come play with me. That line. It's a cliché for the horror genre, is it not? You all know what I mean, the unsettling apparition of a child, or maybe just the voice, beckoning to you. What is it about children that gives them the ability to be so damn creepy? Maybe it's the fact that, generally speaking, children are helpless and anyone with a nurturing side to their personality wants to help them and care for them. I mean, if any one of us saw a child in trouble, I'm sure we'd rush to help in whatever way we could. And in normal circumstances, if a child said, "Come play with me," someone might just pass a ball around for a minute or two, maybe play hopscotch. Children are innocent, right? Safe enough to play with a child, right? I'm telling you you're wrong. This isn't something I like to tell people. In fact, it's something only my mother and I know, but over the past few months it's been building up inside of me. This urge to tell someone. I need to tell someone what happened, even if it was nearly 13 years ago. This isn't a story I'd consider telling people, but not because I'm afraid they'd think me crazy. I couldn't give a damn about that. I don't tell people this because it brings back some pretty painful memories for me, and even now as I'm writing this, it's hard to talk about. Anyway, I've avoided this long enough, it's time. When I was a small girl, I lived in a trailer park with my mom and dad. I was an only child, and I had a normal life, for the most part. I don't remember much. As I said, I was a small child. What I do know is that one night, my mother and father got into a big fight over dinner, which resulted in my father throwing whatever my mother had cooked outside the back door and yelling at me, kicking me across the room at one point. The man had a temper, that was no secret, but he wasn't usually like this, at least not around me. I don't blame him or hate him for any of this, and to this day I'll do anything to defend him. I love my father. However, this incident was a turning point for my mother. The next night when my father went to work, my mother told me we were going on a trip. She packed a small bag of my clothes, one of hers, and told me to grab anything else I might want. All I took was a small stuffed cat named Buttons that my father had given me for my first birthday. She called a cab and we went to a motel room for a few days. After that, she told me that we'd be moving into a new home called a shelter. She said there'd be other kids there, probably some of them around my age, and that I'd like it there. She was right about there being other kids my age, and the house was beautiful. It was huge, with a playground out back and lots of room to run around. What I remember most though was the staircase. I made friends quickly with all the kids there, but the one I liked talking to most was Sarah. Sarah was quiet and she always wore a dress and always stood at the top of the stairs and talked to me. She never did anything else really, and she didn't talk to anyone else. I never went up to her, I just stood at the bottom and we'd talk like that. Sarah didn't really like the other kids very much because she said they weren't like us. She said they didn't know what it was like to think like us. She didn't really like that I played with the other kids, but she didn't try to stop me either. She said she only wanted to play with me. Not long after moving in, I met 3 kids that lived in the house next door. One of them was my age, the boy, and the 2 sisters were a little bit older. My mom said it was a good idea to get out of the house and go play with them for a while, so I did. They invited me to come inside and see their playroom, so of course I did. That sounded awesome. I'd never had a playroom of my own, a room especially made for playing. It sounded great. The room itself was fairly empty except for a toy chest in the corner and several toys strewn on the carpeted floor. The walls were bare white, like the rest of the house, and the windows stood without a curtain just opposite the door. When we were in the playroom, the oldest sister walked over to the window and stared out, shaking her head. "Do you know what happened over there?" she asked. I walked over to where she was and looked to where she was pointing. She was pointing at the shelter, right in the window facing the one in the playroom. I shook my head. What did she mean? What happened there? "Do you wanna know?" she asked me, her brother and sister silent now. I simply nodded, keeping quiet so I could hear the story. A long time ago, there was a little girl named Sarah who lived there. That was her room, she said, pointing to the room across from where we stood. Well, one night there was a fire. Nobody made it out. She almost did. They said they found her body at the top of the stairs, and that's where she died. I felt like I couldn't move. I didn't want to look out the window anymore. I couldn't. They remodeled the building a couple years ago, she said, matter of fact. Stop being a know-it-all with your big words, her brother said. Oh, I said. That's all I could say. Lucky for me, it was starting to get dark, and my mom came over to bring me back with her. I didn't want to tell her because she might not let me play with my new friends again. I didn't want to tell Sarah either. I stayed as far away from the stairs as I could. The next night, the other family who lived in the house told us she and the kids would be gone for a couple of days. This meant that Mom and I were, more or less, alone. I wasn't feeling well, so a little break from other people would be nice. I laid down on the couch and Mom turned the TV on for me, sitting at the other end of the couch. She asked me if I wanted to go upstairs to our room. I said no. I wanted to stay downstairs. I must have fallen asleep. I can still remember that breathing was hard, my nostrils feeling crusty from running so much during the day. I woke up in the middle of the night to the fire alarm going off. Mom woke up around the same time I did and picked me up, carrying me outside. I heard sirens of fire trucks in the distance. I was pretty out of it when they got there, but I still remember what they said to my mom after they'd gone inside. They'd said we couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. I don't know why the alarm went off. How could it have been set off by just nothing? My mom said it was probably just the weather and took me back inside. I remember as she carried me back to the couch that I saw Sarah standing at the top of the stairs, watching me. I started to cry. A week later, my mom said she found a new place for us to live. She said it would be our own apartment, not like the shelter. I was relieved. I hadn't talked to Sarah since those kids told me about her, and I wouldn't go upstairs alone. I hadn't seen her since the incident with the fire alarm. However, I would hear her voice sometimes as I lay in bed at night. It was like she was calling out just to me. Come play with me. The new apartment was close to the school I'd be going to kindergarten at, and, like Mom said, we had our very own place. There were 3 floors, each with one apartment per floor, and ours was on the very top. For several months, my mother and I lived peacefully in our new apartment, and I began to forget about Sarah. For several months, we were happy. I missed my father and thought about him all the time, but for the most part one was happy here. Then the nightmares started. Each and every one were the same. It started as simply me lying in bed at night. This made it initially difficult for me to tell if it was a dream or real. In the dream, I would start to drift off, until the smell of smoke came to my nostrils. At this point, I would jump out of bed, coughing slightly, and looking around. I would cry out for my mom and I could hear her calling for me, but I couldn't get to her. I stayed in the room for the longest time, waiting for my mom or the firemen to come save me. After a while, it became obvious that no one was coming to get me, and I was starting to get lightheaded. I managed to get out of my bedroom door to see that most of the apartment was engulfed in flames. In the dreams, I only made it to the top of the stairs before I passed out on the floor from breathing in too much smoke. The last thing I hear over the crackling of the fire before I wake is a voice. "Come play with me. I will find someone to play with me." The summer before I was to start first grade, my mother announced that we would be moving, yet again, to another town altogether. I wasn't excited. This meant I'd have to make new friends and start over again. Secretly, part of me hoped it would make the nightmares go away. Mom said that we had until the end of July to move into the new apartment, but that she wanted me to see it before we moved in. She took us both on a road trip to a town totally unfamiliar to me, and what seemed to be a long way away from what we called home. The town was bigger than what I was used to, and I remember being excited because we passed 3 playgrounds on the way to the new apartment. She took me inside and we looked around. This place was my favorite of all of them. It had windows everywhere that made it look bright and sunny and above all, happy. I couldn't wait to move, and I was sad that we couldn't move in right then and there. After a while, Mom said we had to go back home, so we went in the car and drove back the way we'd come. As we pulled onto our street, it didn't take long to notice that something was wrong. Lined up in front of our building were 2 fire trucks and a police car, all with lights flashing. My mom parked on the other side of the road and went over, telling me to stay in the car. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I remember staring up at the black smoke still faintly smearing the sky and feeling my blood turn cold. It was coming from our apartment. When Mom came back to the car, her face was drained of all color and she couldn't speak right away. When she finally spoke, it was more to herself, and she could only get 3 words out. "Why just ours?" I thought I saw Sarah up in the blackened window of our former home. Today, I sit at my computer writing this and thinking about her. I'm shaking, and I don't know why. It's months before my 19th birthday and I'm living with my dad, attending a community college in the area. My dad remarried years ago and now has a little girl from his second marriage. She's quite a bit younger than me, 6, and she reminds me a lot of myself at her age. I guess she's the reason I started to write this. I haven't been able to get the events of yesterday out of my head. I was watching her while my dad was at work and I was outside with her while she played on the swing set. I heard the phone ringing inside, so naturally I went to answer it. This isn't the part one can't shake off. The thing is, when I went back outside, Rebecca looked at me and said, "We have to go inside." When I asked her why, she only said 4 little words before running back up the steps and in the house. 4 little words, but they were enough to bring chills up my spine. Sarah wants to play.